Among the founders of the world's major religions, the Buddha was the only teacher who did not claim to be other than an ordinary human being. Other teachers were either God or directly inspired by God. The Buddha was simply a human being, and he claimed no inspiration from any god or external power. He attributed all his realization, attainments and achievements to human endeavor and human intelligence. A man and only a man can become a Buddha. Every man has within himself the potential of becoming a Buddha if he so wills it and works at it. Nevertheless, the Buddha was such a perfect human that he came to be regarded in popular religion as superhuman. Man's position, according to Buddhism, is supreme. Man is his own master, and there is no higher being or power that sits in judgment over his destiny. If the Buddha is to be called a savior at all, it is only in the sense that he discovered and showed the path to liberation, to nirvana, the path we are invited to follow ourselves. It is with this principle of individual responsibility that the Buddha offers freedom to his disciples. This freedom of thought is unique in the history of religion and is necessary because, according to the Buddha, man's emancipation depends on his own realization of truth, and not on the benevolent grace of a god or any external power as a reward for his obedient behavior. The main events of the Buddha's life are well known. He was born Siddhartha Gautama of the Shaka clan. He is said to have had a miraculous birth, precocious childhood, and a princely upbringing. He married and had a son. He encountered an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and a religious ascetic. He became aware of suffering and became convinced that his mission was to seek liberation for himself and others. He renounced his princely life, spent 6 years studying doctrines and undergoing yogic austerities. He then gave up ascetic practices for normal life. He spent 7 weeks in the shade of a Bodhi tree until, finally, one night toward dawn, enlightenment came. Then he preached sermons and embarked on missionary travels for 45 years. He affected the lives of thousands, high and low. At the age of 80 he experienced his parinirvana, extinction itself. This is the most basic outline of his life and mission. The literature inspired by the Buddha's story is as various as those who have told it in the last 2,500 years. To the first of his followers, and the tradition associated with Theravada Buddhism and figures like the great Emperor Ashoka, the Buddha was a man, not a god. He was a teacher, not a savior. To this day the Theravada tradition prevails in parts of India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Thailand. To those who, a few hundred years later, formed the Mahayana school, Buddha was a savior and often a god concerned with man's sorrows above all else. The Mahayana form of Buddhism is in Tibet, Mongolia, Vietnam, Korea, China, and Japan. The historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, is also known as Shakyamuni. Jesus was the Messiah, Christ, the Son of God who was crucified for the sins of humanity before rising from the dead, according to Christian Gospels and early Christian writings. According to the Gospels, Jesus, who was born around 4 BC, was able to perform supernatural feats such as healing a wide range of diseases by simply touching people or speaking to them. He supposedly also had the ability to walk on water, instantly create vast amounts of fish and bread, resurrect the dead, rise from the dead himself, calm storms and exorcise demons from people. The stories told about him have led many scholars to explore these questions. What was Jesus really like? Did he really exist? Today, many of the supernatural feats Jesus is reported to have performed are regarded by scientists as impossible to do, certainly by someone who lived 2,000 years ago. Trying to understand what Jesus was really like is complicated by the fact that the earliest surviving texts that discuss Jesus date to the 2nd century AD, about 100 years after the life of Jesus, although, presumably they were copied from documents that date to the 1st century. In 2015, there were claims that a copy of the Gospel of Mark dating to the 1st century had been found, although it now appears that this copy dates to the 2nd or 3rd century AD. Despite many challenges, recent archaeological and historical research has allowed scholars to shed light on several aspects of Jesus' life, such as what he looked like and what life was like in his hometown of Nazareth. Scholars generally agree that Jesus didn't devote himself to his ministry until he was about 30 years old. This is based on the sequence of events told in the Bible, which suggest that Jesus had not been ministering for long before he was crucified. The Gospel accounts suggest that Jesus spent much of his ministry in the area around Galilee. They tell how Jesus generally avoided luxury, was happy to talk with tax collectors and sinners, favored the poor, and frequently clashed with Jewish religious leaders, who doubted his claim that he was the Messiah. Large crowds sometimes followed him, hoping that he would cure sick people, the Gospels say. The Gospels claim that one of Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, betrayed Jesus by making a deal with a group of Jewish religious leaders to help them arrest Jesus in exchange for money. The leaders then took Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect, governor, of Judea, where he was put on trial. The stories told in the Gospels claim that Pilate was reluctant to find Jesus guilty but was pushed toward the verdict by a mob who wanted Jesus to be crucified. The stories claim that after Jesus was crucified and placed in a tomb, he came back to life. It's uncertain exactly when Jesus was crucified. Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea between AD 26 to 37, and his crucifixion would have occurred at some point within that time. The stories told in the Gospels indicate that Jesus' trial and crucifixion took place around Passover, a Jewish holiday that occurs in spring.